Regina Curry, Chief Diversity Officer at Franklin Templeton. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you with us. You've been with Franklin Templeton since 2020, haven't you? And by the way, what a year to join any company. What changes have you implemented at Franklin Templeton since?
Sure. As you said, it was a phenomenal year to be a chief diversity officer, and it was something that I was happy. I had already had some years under my belt with the organization as well as within experience within the landscape of DEI. So, in terms of what changes I have made when I joined Franklin Templeton, the first thing was just to listen, and we wanted to hear what the employees needed. So the first thing that we did was conducted a global diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging assessment and survey to understand what our employees wanted to how they experienced and perceived our DEI efforts. And the feedback was invaluable. Some of it was tough to hear, right? But we
Mhm.
heard back from our employees, and some of that information we heard back was we realized that maybe we were too narrow, maybe too U.S. centric in our approach, and that helped us to realize some of those things, and we were able to take some of that and use that information to change our strategy and be able to do some things a bit differently based on the feedback that we received from
You,
employees.
you mentioned a survey. Was it primarily in written form, or were there also meetings involved in getting that feedback?
So to be able to reach all of our employees, and Franklin Templeton is a global investment management organization. So we have clients in over 150 countries. So our employees are spread out. It was an electronic survey, so it went out to all of our employees electronically. So it's something they were able to go online to be able to complete
Mhm.
in each country. So we were able to get that information. So at the same time joining, I was also having one-on-one conversations with leaders, meetings with HR professionals, also informational sessions with our BRG leaders, our business resource groups leaders. So it wasn't just the survey itself, it was in combination of hearing more of the listening sessions as well, if you want to call it that, to hear exactly how people felt about the org and what they perceive and also how they experience the organization, which again I think is so extremely important um, for us. And from that, we were able to once we realized that, we were able to take those learnings and say, all right, now from that information, what can we do to address it? Those concerns. We said, now we're going to take this, and we realized to do a different approach. We elevated the conversation to a global DNI strategy, and we embedded into our business strategy. We also created a regionalized DEI approach. So it became more meaningful for our employees to say, yes, we are having a globalized approach, but we also want to look at this from a regional perspective. So this shift was driven by being able to create these regional councils, also our BRG leaders who were more sort of the eyes and the ears on the ground, who help us to create more regionalized, localized approach that it was just be able to make it more meaningful and be able to drive change at a different level. And so, as I was thinking about the theme of your the conference, I wanted to explain it a little bit like this, so folks could understand it in the realm of the what's your flavor. And the way I thought about it is, okay, if we think about our global D&I approach as a global restaurant, right, and our approach is the menu, right, and this is something that we have where everyone all of our recipes people follow from the menu. We have the same standardized approaches, our principles, the things that we do from a global perspective. But each region cooks differently based on their localized flavors, based on what they have and what they need in their particular areas. And so, but we all are cooking from the same kind of menu. So if you think about if you picture like a pizza, if you will, that's something that is universal for most folks and known. Now, a pizza in Italy, right, is going to have a similar recipe to pizza in New York, but it's going to taste very different based on maybe it's different cheeses that you have in Italy. It's going to be baked maybe differently in New York. And so, but it's still the same basic recipe, but the way it translates and the way it's going to be carried out in those regions are going to look very different. And the way we've taken that approach for us to say, all right, now that's how we're going to look at how we value things throughout the where we operate. But the way people look at what we do and localize it through, we understand we have different local cultures, different social aspects, and the way people see and feel DEI. And that's the way that we have to implement it throughout the regions. And the way we do that is through the people on
From
the
what
ground.
you're saying, Regina, it sounds like it's a huge exercise, especially for a company present on so many markets across so many cultures. Perhaps the metaphor of international cuisine is convenient in the sense that, unlike in so many areas, we practically never quarrel about food. We love exploring different cultures in terms of the variety of food they
Mhm.
offer. When I compare it to the experience of gathering all that knowledge in order to find the commonalities, the common ground, or simply ask yourself, where do I start with this in a super sized organization like that? So I would imagine it wasn't an easy exercise to get this knowledge, first of all, and then ask yourself what to do with it next.
Absolutely. Yes, it absolutely was. But what I would say is in any of this, and this isn't anything new, I think, to people, is once you have the senior leadership support, bringing this over and saying, hey, this is going to be something that we are behind, whether it was 2020 or not, because this is something that Franklin Templeton was already committed to, but elevating it to say this isn't going to be something we're going to do traditional sense of the HR approach. We're going to embed it, take it and actually treat it like a business strategy. And I think that's where most folks fall down, where it's treated as a um, corporate responsibility type initiative or philanthropy. And it can be some of those things, but you also have to look at it as building an actual strategy out. And that includes your data, your systems, your strategy, your structure. And for us, it was taking that time coming into the organization and not do action for action's sake. It was stepping back to say, what are the great things that we're doing? Keep doing it, right? I'm not going to come in and say stop doing that because we were doing some really good things. It's how do we create the structure to get the outcomes that we really want to do? And one of those things were to say, hey, we are operating in these different regions. First and foremost, we need to dedicate dedicated resources in those regions. So we were able to get a DNI regional director in EMEA, and one of those folks, a senior leader, speaks three different languages, right? She has a DNI background, right? We
Mhm.
wanted to stand up an executive council to say, I can't tell you, I can read about what the elements are we should focus on. I can tell you insights, I can tell you research, but I need people there who are living and breathing what happens to tell us what are the things we need to focus on, what are those things we need to invest in, what are the challenges for employees. And so that council went and did establish priorities. They looked at even country by country to say what's most important there. What do we need to focus on based on not only the initiatives or elements in the country, but also what types of employees do we have in each market? What are their
Mhm.
concerns and their needs? So it truly was an exercise of how you would do any other business strategy. So I don't want to make it seem like we did something that was so unique and so special. It truly was looking at it through a business lens and stepping up and putting it into a strategy format.
Sounds really fascinating because the scale of the exercise of gathering all this information, developing the kind of support and champions, ambassadors behind those ideas in the leadership structures itself. So now that you have all this knowledge, now that you have been able to prioritize it and build it into processes and awareness, perhaps campaigns within the brand, uh, what are the top things on your mind now, looking to the future?
So to me, it's one of the things where you can talk about all the great trends that are out there. For us, it's how do we make sure that we're continuing to do the things that we set out to do, even in navigating in light of whatever's happening external, right? How do we address the things that are happening external while staying the course long term, right? And I think those things can you can get distracted quite easily. on what's happening externally, whether it is something that is political or things that happen outside of the organization, which you have to address. But for us, is how do we make sure we address the short term by keeping focused on the long term? And for us, it's having those plans in place, having a global plan and strategy, but also making sure we have accountability at line and business levels, making sure our leaders have a plan. It's one thing to have metrics and goals because we have those, right? We're rolling those things out. But the true work happens when you have leaders who are connected to having those a part of their business plans, right? How do I make sure DEI is embedded into my everyday work? So we're focused on making sure that DEI is embedded into what we're doing every day. And that's included with talent, business, how it shows up. So when we talk about DEI, and this was important early on, and I should have said this, starting out, we determined and we started with DEI as an opportunity and not a problem to be solved. And that was a very big, sounds small, but it was really big for us because everything we did was through that mindset. So we weren't trying to fix people. We weren't trying to come at it from a mindset of people were deficient or there was something that we were trying to do that was bringing something. It was a strength, right? We were trying to look at this as an opportunity, how people could grow, how we could be better as a firm through DEI. And I'm not sure if you look at it from that way, everything that you do can be additive and a bonus, and not looking at it from the negative aspect of it. So that's what we're continuing to do, navigating the DEI landscape going forward, but also keeping our eye on what our North Star is, and that's making our organization more successful.
Regina, after you gathered all of that information and started translating it to specific solutions for the company regionally in particular, what were your key conclusions from this process and key initiatives, perhaps?
Well, after gathering all the information and making sure our regional councils were able to look at the priorities, it was important for us to also marry that to what we heard from employees. We look at our strategy, we call it a top down, bottom up, middle out approach. And so one of the things we wanted to make sure that we heard from employees and heard their voice. So, for example, when we look at things like in the European context, we had stood up an ethnicity BRG in the UK and in Europe, which was very different. We were looking at ethnicities that were different than we had in the US environment, which were around Asian, Black, and API and Latinx were in the US context, which were very different than we were looking at in the European context. In the same way, we looked at our culture and our values in our Poland, our Poznan facilities, where we were able to look at our women's network and our LGBTQ network in an environment where we know we were in more of a conservative environment, where we said, okay, our employees are still asking us for these things. We wanted to create that safe environment and community for those things because we wanted to make sure we matched the needs of our employees in addition to what we were trying to do and achieve with our strategies.
A North Star is always a good metaphor to close with. Regina, I wish we had more time to explore some of those issues, but sadly we've run out of time. So if I were to ask you for your one final closing message, perhaps for the community of the D&I Changemakers speakers and guests of this conference, what would it be?
I would say to everyone, change sometimes happens in small ways. And please everyone to stay the course. I know days have been difficult at times, and especially in the DEI space, and can be challenging. But for everyone to, in my own words, keep the faith, give people grace at times, but just keep moving forward and know what our end goal is, and don't waver from that. And just please keep moving forward.
I couldn't have hoped for more. Thank you very much. Regina Curry, Chief Diversity Officer, Franklin Templeton. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.